The next step in the application is to create the list of buttons, but in a dynamic way. Previously, we have added in the Flex layout each one of these buttons, but this is not practical, since if we wanted to make some action on them, as for example to change the background color, we would have to assign the color in each one of the buttons. Let's study then a concept called bindable layout, which basically allows any layout class to generate its content, establishing a binding to a collection of elements with the option of establishing the appearance for each one of them with a data template. That is to say, we're going to have something similar to a list of elements, but using a layout of those that we have seen previously. For example, we could establish a stack layout with a certain visual appearance for each one of the stacked elements, with the advantage that we could use the behavior of the stack layout. In our example, we're going to use the Flex layout behavior, but using a bindable layout. For this, we must assign to the layout a property called bindable layout, and later the item template property. As I said before, you can do this with any layout, and inside item template, I'm going to indicate that I want to use a data template. It is very similar to how we filled a control of data collections that we also saw in a previous chapter. Within the data template, let's define the appearance for each of the buttons. For our example, I'm going to cut one of the buttons that we had previously created, and I'm going to paste it into the data template, since I want all the buttons to have the same visual appearance. I'm going to remove the background color, and I am also going to remove the other buttons at the bottom, since we are not going to need them anymore. See how the code is quite short. The next step is to establish what is going to be the source of information to create each one of the buttons. In our case, we're going to stop the execution of the application, since we are going to go to the code behind, and we're going to create a new list that is going to contain the letters for each button. Then, as part of the graphical interface properties, let's proceed to create a new list that is a list of characters and is called letters, for example. Let's create its get and set, let's convert the property into a full property, and finally, let's set a block body for the set. Once we have done this, remember to invoke onPropertyChange after the value assignment. Now, we need to populate the list with the letters that are going to become buttons. To do this, let's go back to the page constructor, and after the initialize component method, let's use the letters field. And as part of a list, we have a method called addRange, which will allow us to add elements to the list from a string. What we will do will be to pass as parameter the letters of the alphabet. The advantage of doing this is that you could add, for example, numbers if you need to, or some special character. Once we have filled the list, we return to the main page.xaml file, and as part of the Flex layout, we have a property called bindable layout, from which we can access a property called item source, which will allow us to establish the list from where we will take the information to create the set of buttons. We're going to indicate then, through a binding, that the source of information is a property called letters. The last step is to replace the text of this button, since we do not want a static letter, but we want the values that are part of the list of letters. How can we do this? Well, we're going to indicate that as part of the text property, we want to establish a binding to each of the values of the list, and for this we're going to use a dot, whose purpose is to access the value directly from the collection, that is to say, to each letter. Let's test the application to see how it looks, and you can see how we have an error in the execution of the application. I made this error on purpose, because I want you to see one of the common cases that can be a little confusing for those who start in the development with .NET Maui. The error that is happening is because we are trying to assign values to the list of letters, but the collection has not been initialized. We have the list type property, but nowhere have we initialized the list. To solve this problem, we have to create a new instance of the list of characters. This way, if we start once again the execution of the application, we can already see each of the buttons that are being created thanks to the code that we have implemented. This is the power of the bindable layout property. We have already created the set of buttons that can be pressed to guess each of the characters of the word to be guessed.